My alcoholic wife tried to paint me as the monster to win full custody, so I let her lie. Until one file destroyed her in court. I'm 29, and until 8 months ago, I thought the hardest part of divorce would be splitting up our belongings and figuring out custody arrangements. Turns out the real challenge was watching the mother of my children fabricate an entire fictional version of our marriage to try to take them away from me permanently. Let me tell you about how my ex-wife's lies in family court backfired so spectacularly that even her own lawyer looked embarrassed by the end. I met Francine when we were both 22 at a college party. She was magnetic in the way that draws everyone's attention when she walks into her room. She had this infectious energy and confidence that made her seem like the most interesting person at any gathering. We hit it off immediately and started dating within a week of meeting. Back then, her ability to party and have a good time seemed like a positive trait rather than the warning sign it actually was. Our relationship moved quickly, and we got married 2 years after graduating college. I was working as a software engineer at a growing tech company while Francine bounced between marketing jobs at various startups. She was ambitious and creative, but had trouble staying focused on long-term goals. She'd get excited about a new position, then lose interest after a few months when the work became routine. We had our first child, Mason, when I was 26 and Francine was 25. She took maternity leave and seemed to enjoy being a mother at first, but I noticed she was drinking more than usual during the evenings after the baby went to sleep. When I brought it up, she said it was just her way of unwinding after stressful days with a newborn, and that I was being overly sensitive about normal adult behavior. Our daughter Harper was born 18 months later, and that's when Francine's drinking really became a problem. She'd start having wine with lunch, then continue drinking throughout the afternoon while caring for the children. When I'd come home from work, I'd often find her tipsy or drunk while Mason and Harper played unsupervised in the living room. I tried talking to Francine about my concerns, but she'd always have an explanation that made me feel like the unreasonable one. She was just having a glass or two to take the edge off. She was perfectly capable of watching the kids while having a drink. I was being controlling and judgmental about her personal choices. Every conversation ended with her turning the focus back on my supposed issues rather than addressing her increasingly obvious alcohol dependency. The breaking point came when I arrived home early from work one afternoon and found 3-year-old Mason trying to make a sandwich for himself and 18-month-old Harper while Francine was passed out on the couch surrounded by empty wine bottles. Mason had climbed onto the kitchen counter to reach the bread and could have seriously injured himself. Harper was crying and had a dirty diaper that clearly hadn't been changed in hours. I woke Francine up, and she was belligerent and defensive, claiming she'd just been resting her eyes and that the children were fine. She accused me of sneaking home to spy on her and said I was trying to make her look like a bad mother. When I pointed out the empty bottles and the state the children were in, she said I was exaggerating and that one bad afternoon didn't make her an unfit parent. That night, I started documenting everything. I took photos of the empty bottles, the messy house, and the children's condition. I kept a detailed journal of every incident, including dates, times, and specific details about what I'd witnessed. I installed security cameras in the common areas of our house, ostensibly for home security, but really to monitor what was happening when I wasn't there. The footage was worse than I'd imagined. Francine would start drinking as soon as I left for work and would be intoxicated by mid-morning. She'd pass out on the couch while the children played alone, often for hours at a time. Mason learned to change Harper's diapers and get snacks for both of them because their mother was unconscious. On multiple occasions, I watched footage of the children trying to wake Francine up when they needed help or when Harper was crying. I tried one more time to get Francine into treatment. I researched rehabilitation programs, found one that specialized in helping mothers with addiction, and offered to pay for everything. I suggested family counseling and individual therapy. I even offered to take time off work to help her through the initial stages of recovery. She refused everything and accused me of trying to control her life and destroy her relationship with her children. When I filed for divorce and requested primary custody of Mason and Harper, Francine's response was to launch a campaign to paint me as an abusive, controlling husband who was trying to steal her children out of spite. She hired an aggressive family law attorney and began constructing a narrative that would make her look like the victim of my supposed manipulation and emotional abuse. The lies started small but grew more elaborate as the custody battle intensified. According to Francine, I was a workaholic who ignored my family and left all the parenting responsibilities to her. I was emotionally distant and critical, making her feel worthless and driving her to drink as a coping mechanism. I was controlling about finances and household decisions, never allowing her to have input on important matters affecting our family. Her lawyer filed motion after motion requesting supervised visitation for me, claiming I posed a danger to the children's emotional well-being. They painted a picture of a cold, calculating man who prioritized work over family and used psychological manipulation to maintain control over his wife and children. Every normal disagreement we'd ever had was reframed as evidence of my abusive behavior. The most damaging allegation was that I deliberately sabotaged Francine's attempts to get sober by hiding alcohol around the house and encouraging her to drink during stressful situations. According to her sworn testimony, I'd used her addiction as a weapon to maintain power in our relationship and was now exploiting it to gain custody of the children. My lawyer advised me to respond aggressively to these allegations, but I had a different strategy in mind. Instead of fighting each lie individually, I decided to let Francine dig herself deeper while I quietly compiled evidence that would prove the truth. I knew that her version of events was so far from reality that given enough rope, she'd eventually hang herself with her own fabrications. The custody evaluation process began and Francine performed beautifully for the court-appointed psychologist. She was sober, articulate, and presented herself as a devoted mother who'd overcome her struggles with alcohol through determination and love for her children. She claimed to have been sober for 6 months and provided documentation from a therapist supporting her recovery. But I knew something the court didn't know yet. Francine hadn't stopped drinking, she'd just gotten better at hiding it. And I had proof that would destroy every lie she'd told in spectacular fashion. The custody evaluation process dragged on for months while Francine continued building her case that I was an unfit father who'd driven her to drink through years of emotional abuse. She painted herself as a reformed alcoholic who'd found the strength to overcome her addiction for the sake of her children. According to her narrative, she was now sober, stable, and ready to provide the loving home that Mason and Harper deserved. During her evaluation sessions with the court-appointed psychologist Dr. Sterling, Francine was the picture of maternal devotion. She spoke eloquently about her journey through addiction and recovery. She described her daily routine of caring for the children, including detailed schedules of meals, activities, and bedtime rituals. She presented letters from friends and family members attesting to her sobriety and her dedication to being a good mother. Most convincingly, she provided documentation from her therapist, Dr. Camden, showing 6 months of consistent attendance at both individual counseling sessions and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. The records painted a picture of someone who'd recognized her problem, taken responsibility for her actions, and committed to long-term recovery for the benefit of her family. My evaluation sessions didn't go as smoothly. Dr. Sterling seemed skeptical of my allegations about Francine's drinking, particularly given the evidence she'd presented of her recovery. When I described the incidents I'd witnessed, the psychologist would ask why I hadn't intervened sooner or why I'd allowed the situation to continue if I was truly concerned about the children's safety. If your wife was as impaired as you claim, why didn't you take immediate action to protect her children? Dr. Sterling asked during one particularly frustrating session. Why wait until you were ready for divorce to address these alleged safety concerns? I tried to explain that I'd attempted multiple times to get Francine help and that I'd been documenting everything to build a case for custody. But without being able to present my evidence during the evaluation process, my concerns sounded like the bitter accusations of a vindictive ex-husband trying to gain advantage in a custody dispute. Francine's lawyer coached her perfectly for her court appearances. She was always impeccably dressed, spoke clearly and confidently, and presented herself as a mother fighting to maintain a relationship with children who were being used as weapons against her. She'd tear up at appropriate moments when discussing how much she missed having daily contact with Mason and Harper and how devastating it was to have her parenting questioned. During one particularly theatrical court session, Francine's lawyer presented what they called evidence of my controlling behavior. They compiled screenshots of text messages where I'd asked Francine about her activities or expressed concern about her drinking. These normal spousal communications were reframed as examples of surveillance and psychological manipulation. Your Honor, these messages show a pattern of obsessive monitoring and emotional abuse, her lawyer argued. Mr. Defendant clearly used his wife's struggles with alcohol as a means of maintaining dominance in the relationship. He isolated her from friends and family, made her feel worthless, and then documented her lowest moments to use against her in court. They presented bank statements showing that I'd controlled our finances as evidence that I'd prevented Francine from seeking help for her addiction. They claimed I'd deliberately kept her financially dependent so she couldn't leave or get treatment without my permission. Every responsible financial decision I'd made was twisted into evidence of abuse and control. The most infuriating part was watching Francine lie under oath about specific incidents I had documented. She'd admit to having a drinking problem in the past, but claimed it had never affected her ability to care for the children. According to her testimony, she'd never been intoxicated while supervising Mason and Harper and had never put them in danger through her drinking. I may have had a glass of wine with dinner or to unwind in the evenings, she testified with practiced sincerity, but I was always completely capable of caring for my children. The suggestion that I was ever impaired while they were in my care is simply false and hurtful. When confronted with my allegations about specific incidents, she had explanations for everything. The afternoon I'd found her passed out was actually a migraine that had forced her to lie down while the children played quietly nearby. The empty bottles I'd photographed were from a dinner party we'd hosted weeks earlier that I'd forgotten to clean up. Every piece of evidence I'd tried to present was dismissed as misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation. My lawyer grew increasingly frustrated with the direction the case was taking. Dr. Sterling's preliminary report suggested that while both parents had strengths and weaknesses, Francine's documented recovery efforts and emotional presentation made her appear to be the more stable choice for primary custody. The psychologist noted my rigid and controlling personality traits and suggested that my focus on Francine's past drinking might be preventing me from recognizing her growth and change. "We need to shift strategy," my lawyer told me after a particularly bad court session. "The judge is buying her recovery story, and your documentation isn't going to be enough to overcome that. We need character witnesses, expert testimony on addiction, something to counter the narrative she's building." But I wasn't ready to reveal my ace in the hole yet. Francine was performing so well that I wanted her to feel completely confident in her lies before I destroyed them. The security footage I'd been collecting showed the truth about her supposed sobriety, and I knew that when the time was right, it would obliterate every claim she'd made about her recovery. During the months of custody proceedings, I'd continued monitoring the house through the security system even after moving out. Francine didn't know the cameras were still recording because they were hidden and connected to a cloud storage system she couldn't access. What those cameras captured during her supposed 6 months of sobriety was devastating. The footage showed Francine drinking heavily every single day, often starting before noon and continuing throughout the afternoon while caring for the children. She'd hide bottles around the house and pour alcohol into coffee mugs and water bottles to disguise what she was consuming. When visitors came over, she'd spray air freshener and use breath mints to hide the smell of alcohol. Most damaging were the recordings of her coaching the children on what to say if anyone asked about Mommy's drinking. I watched her tell Mason to say that Mommy only drank water and juice and that she never acted funny or sleepy during the day. She promised Harper special treats if she didn't mention the times Mommy had to lie down during playtime. The recordings also captured Francine on phone calls with her therapist, Dr. Camden, discussing how to maintain the appearance of sobriety during the custody evaluation. They talked about which meetings to attend to get signatures for AA attendance and how to frame her relationship with alcohol in a way that would satisfy the court requirements. But the most shocking footage was from just 2 weeks before our final custody hearing. Francine was so drunk that she fell down the stairs while carrying Harper. Both of them could have been seriously injured, and Harper was crying hysterically while Francine tried to convince her not to tell Daddy about Mommy's accident. I had hours and hours of footage showing Francine's continued drinking, her attempts to hide it from the children, and the dangerous situations her intoxication created. Every claim she'd made about her sobriety, every tear she'd shed in court, every accusation she'd made about my character was about to be exposed as a complete fabrication. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and I'd arranged for the footage to be presented as evidence. Francine had no idea what was coming, and neither did her lawyer. They built their entire case on the foundation of her recovery and her claims about my controlling behavior. That foundation was about to crumble in the most spectacular way possible. The morning of our final custody hearing, Francine arrived at court looking like the picture of composed motherhood. She wore a conservative navy dress, minimal makeup, and had her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She perfected this look over months of court appearances, and it had served her well in convincing Judge Morrison that she was a reformed woman who deserved primary custody of her children. Her lawyer had prepared an opening statement that would summarize their case against me. They planned to present me as a controlling husband who'd used his wife's past struggles with alcohol to manipulate custody proceedings. According to their narrative, I was the real danger to the children because of my rigid personality and inability to support Francine through her recovery. "Your Honor," her lawyer began confidently, "my client has demonstrated remarkable growth and commitment to sobriety over the past 6 months. She's attended therapy, consistently participated in support groups, and maintained a stable home environment for her children. Meanwhile, the plaintiff continues to dwell on past mistakes instead of recognizing the positive changes my client has made. Francine nodded along with every word, looking appropriately serious and maternal. She'd rehearsed this performance for months and knew exactly when to look sad, when to appear strong, and when to dab at her eyes with a tissue. The judge had seen this routine before and seemed to be responding positively to her presentation. My lawyer then stood to address the court, and I could see the confidence drain from Francine's face as he began speaking. Your Honor, we have new evidence that directly contradicts every claim the defendant has made about her sobriety and recovery. This evidence shows a pattern of continued alcohol abuse, deception, and child endangerment that has continued throughout these proceedings. What evidence? Judge Morrison asked, clearly annoyed that new materials were being introduced at the final hearing. Security footage from the family home, Your Honor. Footage that shows the defendant's actual behavior during the 6 months she claims to have been sober. Francine's lawyer immediately objected, claiming that any such recordings would be inadmissible without proper notice and that I'd violated privacy laws by recording in our home. But my lawyer was prepared for this argument. The security system had been installed with Francine's knowledge and consent when we were still married, and I had every right to monitor my own property even after moving out. Judge Morrison allowed the evidence to be presented, and my lawyer began playing selected clips from the hundreds of hours of footage I'd collected. The first video showed Francine at 11 in the morning drinking directly from a wine bottle while Mason and Harper played in the living room. She was clearly intoxicated, stumbling slightly as she moved around the kitchen. This footage is from 3 weeks ago, Your Honor, my lawyer explained. During the time period when Ms. Francine claims to have been maintaining sobriety for 6 months. The second clip showed Francine pouring vodka into a coffee mug and drinking it while helping Mason with a puzzle. When Harper started crying, she ignored the child for several minutes before eventually getting up to check on her. Her movements were slow and unsteady, and she had obvious difficulty focusing on simple tasks. Francine's face had gone completely white, and her lawyer was frantically shuffling through papers trying to figure out how to respond to evidence they hadn't expected. Judge Morrison watched the footage with increasing concern, asking my lawyer to pause certain sections so he could examine Francine's behavior more closely. Are there more examples of this behavior? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. We have documented evidence of daily drinking throughout the entire 6-month period the defendant claims to have been sober. The third video was the most damaging. It showed Francine coaching Mason on what to say if anyone asked about her drinking. She was visibly drunk during this conversation, but speaking clearly enough for her words to be understood by the court. Remember what we talked about, she said to 4-year-old Mason. Mommy only drinks juice and water during the day. If anyone asks you about mommy acting sleepy or funny, you say that never happens, okay? And if you're a good boy and remember our secret, mommy will take you for ice cream. Judge Morrison stopped the video and turned to look directly at Francine. Miss Francine, is this your voice on the recording? Francine's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. I asked Miss Francine a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Yes, Your Honor, that's my voice, Francine whispered, barely audible. And are you instructing your 4-year-old son to lie about your drinking behavior? Francine couldn't answer. She just sat there staring at her hands while her lawyer tried to formulate some kind of response to the devastating evidence that had just destroyed their entire case. But we weren't finished. My lawyer played the footage of Francine falling down the stairs while carrying Harper. The sound of Harper's crying and Francine's slurred words trying to convince her daughter not to tell Daddy about the accident filled the courtroom. Judge Morrison watched the entire clip without interruption, his expression growing darker with each passing second. How old is your daughter, Miss Francine? The judge asked. She's 2, Your Honor, Francine replied through tears. And in this video, you're carrying a 2-year-old child while clearly intoxicated and you fall down a flight of stairs? It was an accident, Your Honor. I slipped. Because you were drunk while carrying your toddler daughter. Francine's lawyer finally found his voice. Your Honor, my client has been under enormous stress during these proceedings. These isolated incidents don't represent her overall parenting or her commitment to recovery. Isolated incidents? Judge Morrison replied incredulously. Counselor, how many hours of similar footage does the plaintiff have? My lawyer answered immediately. Over 40 hours of recorded evidence showing daily alcohol consumption, Your Honor. This footage spans the entire 6-month period during which the defendant has claimed to be sober. The judge turned back to Francine. Ms. Francine, you've testified under oath in my courtroom that you've been sober for 6 months. You've presented documentation of therapy attendance in AA meetings. You've claimed that your ex-husband is lying about your drinking to gain custody advantage. How do you explain this footage? Francine broke down completely. All the composure and maternal dignity she'd maintained throughout months of proceedings disappeared as she sobbed uncontrollably. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder trying to calm her down, but the damage was done. I never meant for it to go this far, she finally managed between sobs. I thought I could stop drinking on my own. I thought I could prove I was a good mother without having to give up everything. Everything meaning alcohol? Judge Morrison clarified. I know it sounds bad, but I was functional. The children were never in real danger. I was always watching them. My lawyer played one more clip. This one showed Francine passed out on the couch while 2-year-old Harper climbed onto the kitchen counter trying to reach something in a high cabinet. Harper could easily have fallen and seriously injured herself while her mother was unconscious just feet away. Judge Morrison had seen enough. He called for a recess, and when court resumed an hour later, his decision was swift and decisive. When Judge Morrison returned from recess, his demeanor had shifted from professional neutrality to barely controlled anger. He'd spent the break reviewing additional footage and documentation that my lawyer had provided, and what he'd seen had clearly influenced his decision about custody arrangements. I've been presiding over family court cases for 15 years, Judge Morrison began, and I've seen many situations where parents struggle with addiction while trying to maintain custody of their children. What I witnessed today, however, goes far beyond addiction issues and enters the realm of deliberate deception, perjury, and child endangerment. Francine's lawyer tried one last desperate attempt to salvage their case. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that she's made mistakes during this difficult period. We asked the court to consider ordering treatment and supervised visitation rather than making any permanent custody decisions based on what are clearly temporary setbacks in her recovery. Judge Morrison cut him off immediately. Counselor, your client didn't have temporary setbacks. Your client committed perjury in my courtroom repeatedly and over an extended period. She lied under oath about her sobriety, she coached her children to lie to cover up her drinking, and she put those children in physical danger through her continued alcohol abuse. The judge then turned to address Francine directly. Miss Francine, you've spent months in my courtroom portraying yourself as a devoted mother fighting to maintain a relationship with children who were being used against you. You've accused your ex-husband of emotional abuse and manipulation. You've claimed that his documentation of your drinking was evidence of controlling behavior rather than legitimate concern for child safety. Francine tried to respond, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. The evidence presented today shows that every major claim you've made during these proceedings was false. You weren't sober, you weren't attending therapy consistently, and you weren't providing a safe environment for your children. Instead, you were drinking daily to the point of impairment while caring for a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. The judge's voice grew sterner as he continued. What's most disturbing is your attempt to involve your children in covering up your behavior. Teaching a 4-year-old to lie about his mother's drinking isn't just inappropriate, it's psychological manipulation of the worst kind. You were training your own child to participate in deception that could have prevented him from getting help if he needed it. My lawyer had prepared character witnesses and expert testimony about the effects of parental alcoholism on children, but Judge Morrison indicated that additional evidence wouldn't be necessary. The security footage had provided more than enough information for him to make his custody determination. Based on the evidence presented today, I'm awarding primary physical custody of both children to the plaintiff, Judge Morrison announced. The defendant will have supervised visitation rights only, and those visits will be contingent upon her successful completion of an inpatient alcohol treatment program, followed by at least 1 year of documented sobriety. Francine's supervised visits would take place at a family services center with a trained monitor present at all times. She would not be allowed to take the children anywhere or have any unsupervised contact with them until she could demonstrate sustained recovery through regular drug and alcohol testing, therapy attendance, and completion of parenting classes. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential perjury charges. Lying under oath in family court is a serious crime that undermines the entire judicial process and puts children at risk. The judge also ordered Francine to pay my legal fees and court costs, acknowledging that her deceptive behavior had unnecessarily prolonged and complicated the proceedings. The financial judgment was significant, but the real victory was knowing that Mason and Harper would be safe, and that their mother's lies hadn't succeeded in keeping them in a dangerous situation. After court, Francine's lawyer approached mine to discuss the possibility of an appeal, but there was nothing to appeal. The evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Morrison's decision was based on documented facts rather than subjective interpretations. Francine had destroyed her own case through her continued drinking and her decision to lie under oath about her sobriety. The aftermath of the custody hearing was swift and decisive. Word spread quickly through our social circle about what had happened in court, and Francine found herself isolated from many of the friends and family members who had supported her throughout the proceedings. People who had believed her stories about my controlling behavior and her successful recovery felt deceived and manipulated. Francine's parents, who had written letters supporting her custody case, were particularly devastated. They genuinely believed their daughter was sober and had been proud of her apparent commitment to recovery. Learning that she'd been drinking throughout the entire custody process while lying to everyone, including them, about her sobriety damaged their relationship significantly. The court-appointed therapist Dr. Camden also faced scrutiny when it was revealed that some of Francine's therapy attendance records had been falsified. An investigation showed that while Francine had attended some sessions, she'd missed many others and had used a friend to sign in for her at group meetings to maintain the appearance of consistent participation. 6 months after the custody decision, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Francine had finally entered an inpatient treatment program. Whether this was genuine motivation for recovery or simply a requirement for maintaining any contact with Mason and Harper remained to be seen. Her supervised visits with the children were limited to 2 hours twice per week and required advanced scheduling through the Family Services Center. Mason and Harper adjusted well to their new living situation. Having consistent routine, stable childcare, and a sober parent providing daily care made an enormous difference in their behavior and development. Mason stopped having the anxiety and behavioral issues he developed during the period when Francine's drinking was at its worst, and Harper began sleeping through the night consistently for the first time in months. The most satisfying aspect of the outcome wasn't the legal victory, but watching my children thrive in an environment where their safety and well-being were prioritized over adult dysfunction. They didn't have to worry about finding mommy asleep when they needed help or being coached to lie about what they witnessed at home. A year later, Francine completed her inpatient treatment and began the process of trying to rebuild a relationship with Mason and Harper. Her supervised visits went well, and she appeared to be taking her recovery seriously this time. Whether she would maintain sobriety long-term remained to be seen, but at least the children were protected while she figured out her priorities. The experience taught me that sometimes the best strategy when dealing with someone who lies compulsively is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Francine's confidence in her ability to deceive the court led her to tell increasingly elaborate lies that became impossible to maintain once the truth was revealed. If I'd fought her accusations directly from the beginning, I might not have been able to gather the overwhelming evidence that ultimately destroyed her case. Most importantly, I learned that protecting children sometimes requires difficult decisions that prioritize their safety over adult feelings and relationships. Francine's drinking had put Mason and Harper at risk, and no amount of family loyalty or hope for her recovery could justify leaving them in that situation. The security footage that destroyed Francine's custody case wasn't just evidence of her continued drinking. It was proof that she was willing to lie under oath, endanger her children, and manipulate the legal system to avoid accountability for her actions. Judge Morrison's decision wasn't just about alcoholism, it was about character, and Francine had shown that hers was fundamentally lacking when it came to putting her children's needs above her own desires. In the end, the truth won, and my children were safe. Sometimes that's the best outcome you can hope for.